She laughed and said I wouldn't last a day without her. But when she came back begging, what she saw inside shattered her ego forever. I am 31, and for 4 long years I believed I was building a real future with a woman named Veronica, who is 29. For the last 2 years, we even lived together in an apartment that I thought represented partnership, growth, and stability. But looking back now, I realized that I had been living in a carefully built illusion. Veronica played the role of someone who was taking care of everything, while secretly making me look helpless and dependent on her. She would tell her friends jokes at my expense, laughing that without her, I would probably starve or let the apartment fall into chaos. Her favorite thing to say at gatherings was that she was practically raising a grown man, and people would laugh along with her. I would stand there, smiling weakly, pretending it didn't bother me, even though deep down, I knew it wasn't true. The reality was that before Veronica, I had lived alone for 6 years. I was completely capable of running my own life. I cooked my own meals, kept my apartment clean, paid my bills, and managed everything without help. I was independent and responsible. But when Veronica came into my life, she slowly took over everything and convinced me to step back. She said it was her love language to manage the household and that doing things for me was how she showed she cared. First, I believed her. I thought letting her handle things was a way of showing trust. So I stopped cooking because she said my food was too basic. I let her redecorate the apartment because she said my style was too much like a bachelor pad. I even let her take over grocery shopping because she complained that I always bought the wrong brands. Bit by bit, I handed over control until it looked like I couldn't do anything on my own. Then 3 weeks ago, everything came crashing down. I came home from work early one day because I had a terrible migraine. All I wanted was some quiet rest. But when I opened the door, I found Veronica sitting on our couch with a man named Garrett, who she knew from yoga class. And they definitely weren't doing yoga. The scene was so predictable, so cliché, that for a moment I almost laughed from the shock of it. But what hurt more than the betrayal was her attitude. She didn't look guilty. She didn't apologize. Instead, she started gathering her belongings and blaming me. She said it was my fault because I was boring, because I made her feel like she was my mother instead of my partner, and that she deserved something more exciting. And then came the moment that changed everything. Standing at the door with her bags, she smirked at me and said, "You won't last a day without me. This place will fall apart, and you'll be begging me to come back before the weekend." I looked right at her and calmly replied, "Try me." She laughed loudly, a sharp and mocking sound, before slamming the door behind her. And just like that, 4 years ended in seconds. What she did not know was that I was far more capable than she ever let me show. For the past year, I had secretly been cooking and meal prepping every week for my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Tomoko, who had broken her hip and couldn't cook for herself. Veronica thought I was just helping the building super with odd jobs, when I was really spending hours cooking detailed meals for someone who truly appreciated them. Every Sunday, I prepared 5 different dishes, carefully portioned and labeled them, and delivered them to Mrs. Tomoko. Cooking was something I always loved, but Veronica had convinced me to hide that part of myself because she said my food was basic. The very first thing I did after she left was deep clean the entire apartment. What I found shocked me. The woman who always called me a slob and acted like she was the one keeping our place together had been hiding the real mess. I pulled 3 months' worth of her hair out of the bathroom drain. I found moldy containers hidden behind her carefully arranged pantry. I even discovered that she had been shoving dirty dishes into the oven whenever friends came over so she could pretend the kitchen was spotless. I took pictures of everything because I wanted proof that her image of being the clean and organized one was a complete lie. Within 3 days, I had reorganized the entire apartment. I fixed the leaky faucet that she always said needed a plumber. It turned out to just be a loose washer. I brought back my original furniture that she had forced me to store away because she said it wasn't Instagram-worthy. Slowly, the place began to feel like home again. Not the staged, sterile space she had designed for appearances, but a real living space that reflected who I was. And as I did this, I documented everything. Not to post online or show off, but for myself. I took photos of the meals I cooked, the kitchen I restored, the garden I started on the balcony with help from Mrs. Tomoko. It became a record of my life slowly coming back to me. Meanwhile, my phone was blowing up with messages. First, they were from friends of Veronica, asking if I was okay, clearly trying to fish for drama. Then mutual acquaintances started talking about how Veronica was posting online about her brave new chapter, and how she was finally free from having to be a caretaker. I didn't reply to any of them. I focused on living my own life. I kept cooking, kept fixing the apartment, and even started going to pottery classes on Thursdays. Something I had always wanted to try, but she called embarrassingly hipster. Exactly 1 week later, on a Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, there was aggressive knocking at my door. And when I opened it, guess who was standing there? When I opened the door that morning, I saw Veronica standing there. She looked nothing like the confident, smirking woman who walked out a week earlier. Her hair was in a messy bun, but not the cute kind. More like she had given up. She was wearing the same sweatshirt she left in, dragging 2 suitcases behind her. Without even asking, she tried to push past me and said, "I need to get some things." I should have closed the door, but part of me wanted her to see what I had done with the place. I wanted her to realize that the man she mocked was more than capable. She took just a few steps inside before she froze. The apartment was spotless, but more than that, it looked alive. My original artwork was back on the walls. The living room was arranged comfortably instead of being staged like a magazine photo. The kitchen counters were clear and organized. She narrowed her eyes and said, "You hired a cleaner." I shook my head and said, "Nope." She walked to the kitchen and opened the fridge. Inside were glass containers, each labeled for the week's meals: teriyaki salmon, roasted vegetables, homemade kimchi, fresh pasta sauce. She looked confused. "So you got a meal delivery service?" Again I said, "Nope." She didn't know what to say. Then she looked out the window and saw the balcony. What used to be her spot for drinking wine had been turned into a thriving garden. Tomatoes, herbs, and even Japanese cucumbers were growing there with seeds Mrs. Tomoko had given me. Veronica's jaw dropped. "What the hell, Brendan?" she whispered. I should have asked her to leave right then, but instead, I offered her coffee. I told her I had roasted my own beans the day before. She watched me carefully brew it with a pour-over method, like I was performing magic. When she took a sip, her expression changed from shock to sadness to something else entirely. She whispered, "Why didn't you ever do this before?" I looked at her calmly and said, "You told me my coffee tasted like dirt water, remember? You said real coffee was too much work and bought that espresso machine instead." She sat down on the leather couch, the same one she had made me put into storage because it didn't fit her aesthetic. And then she started crying. Not the fake tears she used to pull when she wanted something, but real ugly crying. Between sobs, she began explaining her situation. Garrett, the yoga instructor she left me for, actually lived in a studio apartment with 3 other roommates. Not his own studio, one studio they all shared, with curtains to divide spaces. She had been sleeping on an air mattress behind a curtain. His roommates hated the arrangement and even stole her shampoo. But that wasn't the worst of it. She said she had been fired from her job. Since she worked from home, she tried logging in from Garrett's place. The system flagged her IP address, and when they investigated, they found out she had been doing almost no work for months, letting her team handle everything without permission. She was caught and let go. Now she had no job, no comfortable place to live, and Garrett wasn't treating her the way she expected. Looking at me with desperation, she said, "I need to stay here for a while until I figure things out." I nearly laughed. I said, "Veronica, you cheated on me in our home. You told me I was nothing without you. Now you want to come back here." She tried to give a speech about forgiveness and growth. Then she said, "Besides, I'm still on the lease. I have a right to be here." That's when I pulled out a folder. I showed her that she had texted me the week before saying she wanted off the lease because she didn't want ties to, and I quote, "that pathetic excuse for an adult." I had taken those texts to building management, and she had digitally signed a consent form to be removed. She tried to argue that she never signed anything. I pulled up the record showing she signed it from Garrett's computer in 5 seconds without even reading it. The look on her face was priceless. She changed tactics. She claimed she needed her furniture back. I showed receipts proving she bought it with my credit card or that it belonged to my family before she painted over it without permission. I even pulled up before and after photos showing how my apartment looked warm and comfortable before she made it sterile and empty. Finally, I said, "I'll send you $200 on Venmo for the throw pillows. You can keep the crystals." She shook with anger and said, "You're being vindictive. This is wrong." Then she stormed out, saying she'd go stay with her parents. But that was only the beginning. Over the next weeks, I got strange texts from unknown numbers. Supposed friends asking me to let Veronica collect important documents. Garrett asking for a necklace that never existed. A so-called business partner asking for a laptop that was actually mine. I replied to none of them. When she started showing up at my building, the doorman, Ricardo, stepped in and protected me, even telling her I was out of the country. Then one afternoon, she sent her mother, Dorothy, to my pottery class. Dorothy wore designer clothes and looked down at everything around her, acting like I had wronged her daughter. She told me I should take Veronica back because she was struggling. I calmly reminded her that Veronica had cheated, lied, and harassed me. Dorothy called Garrett unsuitable because he had been fired for inappropriate behavior. She tried to argue that Veronica was a visionary who shouldn't have to do normal work. I looked at her and said, "Dorothy, she needs a job, not a rescue." That was when Dorothy warned me, "You'll regret this. She was the best thing that ever happened to you." I smiled and finished my pottery. The final breaking point came a week later. I came home one evening and found Veronica sitting on my couch, eating my meal prep, watching my Netflix. She had snuck in through a maintenance door I didn't realize needed a new lock. She smirked and said, "I still had a spare key." I told her to leave, and that's when she played her last card. She looked me in the eyes and said, "I'm pregnant. It's yours." I stared at her in silence before replying, "Veronica, we haven't been together in almost 2 months. That math doesn't work." She tried to backtrack and said she might be pregnant because she was late. I pulled out my phone, started recording and said, "You're trespassing and you're lying. Leave now." She burst into tears, pretending for the camera that I was cold and heartless. Then, in a fit of rage, she started destroying things. She threw my containers on the floor, broke my pottery, and tossed plants off the balcony. I just kept recording. When she was done, panting, I showed her the phone and said, "Thanks for the evidence. Security cameras saw you enter without permission too. I'm calling the police." She ran out immediately. 2 days later, I had a restraining order against her. She was banned from the property. She had to pay for the pottery she destroyed because I kept receipts. The building fixed the maintenance door. Finally, I had peace. The best part came after. Mrs. Tomoko invited me for tea and introduced me to her friend, Ko, who taught cooking classes. She had heard about my meals and invited me to help teach. That night, I got one last text from Dorothy asking about Veronica's belongings. I replied with a storage unit number, paid for 1 month, and sent the receipt. After that, I blocked the number. Now my life is calmer than ever. My apartment is clean and truly mine. I cook better than ever before. My balcony garden is thriving. And the pottery bowl I made holds fresh tomatoes I grew myself. Veronica once told me I would be begging for her back. But the truth is, she came back begging, and I didn't need her at all.